Right, so I'm not saying that the fleur-de-lis ever meant anything like what I said. I'm just saying that's what it can be taken to mean. The unfortunate idea is that that somehow Luciferian Satanism is essential, an essential foundation. Like you've got to deal with that, and as far as people are at that level, it's like, well, you're not actually letting the proper come through. The direction of the physics of that flower, they're a bit rubbish, really. I mean, 3 was always a mystical number, just because of the way that it feels, I guess. So all I'm saying is, you don't really have to redeem the symbols. If you don't feel like doing it, if you don't feel you can, don't bother, because they've got a lot of energetic qualities in them that are not really enlightened or virtuous or whatever. They're not divine, they're not proper. And that's just the truth of it, It doesn't mean that we're wrong, Sympathy is a funny old thing. You've got to watch out for it. Wrong way, wrong sympathy for the wrong people, it can really mess you up, We don't have to honour the past. Not really. We don't have to. There's no duty to. If you're a man of the past and you've done things Luciferian, and you had any honour, would you say, you know what, I want the people of the future to be bound to this moral level? You would never say that. And everything can be reissued in the faith, right? So it's like, what would toughness look like in the faith, you know what I mean? It always has to move to the side of conservative, It has to lack the intent to violence. If you say, I've got to be violent because somebody else is violent, okay, God could be with you, and that's okay. But you've got to watch out, because the Holy Spirit can deal with things. And I say that duly mystically, it can be God, it can be the air, the energies, it can be people that are in those energies, it can be you, the holiness of your spirit. What's your intent? Because if you don't know how to close down violence, you're just a struggler. And that's the irony of the name Israel. God strives. Look at the story. The story is ironic. He wrestled with him until daybreak. He only had to touch him, his whole life, his whole body was destroyed. So, the whole message is, yeah, maybe God will let you wrestle with his law, but just remember that he has power over the body. That's the real message. So for Israelis to think that violence is necessarily ever, there's the intention. And that relates to knowledge, So we've got to start actually looking into things that work for us, rather than taking vulgar pride in mutual debasement. Because the thing about mutual debasement, if everybody's at the same moral level, then that, in as far as it's like a nation or strong in the world, which is a bit gainsaid by nuclear weapons and things like that, but it's gainsaid anyway by just the way that things work out. But within nations or across nations. But here's the thing: what you got to understand is, we've got to kind of drop this kind of freedom from culpability in mutual sin. Whether it's imitation, whether it's just vulgarity, because we're all paying into that, and it's very easy to do. And as far as we think we know the law of God. China doesn't have that problem because it's not trying to think that it knows the law of God, so it's free to be pragmatic. We're crucifying our consciences on our poverty of philosophy. Spirit influences psyche, so if your spirit isn't a joke and you think that's the religion, then who knows what will come up in your psyche as a supposedly good idea. A lot of sin is the idea that it will stop sin, and or that it will prove to be an education. If you want to study anything, study it in the Holy Spirit, and that will duly give you the timing, because that's with the sense. So, anyhow, next point. There's every evidence that a lot of people that you might call Intel, maybe Intel would say we have nothing to do with that. I would contest that you ought to know that's the moral level that you're kind of appealing to, in as far as you're not with the Holy Spirit, and maybe it was counterintuitive because it's too easy, it's too broad, it's too personal. But it becomes broad, as it were, from the person. You see, that's the point. So, that's the Aquarius. They say that the Piscean is defined by the Fighting Brothers, the Aquarius. Well, I'll just say it's the reconciliation of... it's the reconciliation. Anyway, I've got 10 seconds, so I want to say this. For psychiatry, for Intel, to criminalise, to step back from, to do nothing about psychiatry, when their own people are hearing voices, that's sick.